Welcome to TrulyFit, the online fitness marketplace connecting pros and clients through unique fitness business software.
Andy, thanks so much for joining the TrulyFit Podcast. Why don't you quickly give the audience a little background on you, who you are, what you do in health and fitness?
Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Chan. And right now, if you look on the internet, there's a plethora of health information out there. So much so that perhaps it is overwhelming. So with a master's degree in exercise science, my job as a coach, as an educator, is to help people navigate through the sea of information so that people don't have to waste time doing things that ultimately hurt their performance, but actually incorporate practices that get them to optimum health and human performance. So I do personal training, I do group training, I do corporate workshops, and now I do webinars as well.
What do you enjoy the most? If you could only do one of those things, if someone said, hey, Andy, we have to take something away from you, personal training or group training or doing these like conference speaking, if you could only pick one of them, what would you stick with?
Wow. I would do personal training because then it gives me the maximum chance to influence someone's lifestyle because you get to walk with them, on a weekly basis. And for me, that's the most rewarding that's the most rewarding part of our job. And that is to see changes occurring after a few sessions.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think part of that, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, either accidentally or we can hit on it right now. But as a personal trainer, when people don't talk about it enough, but there's a personal side. So we're not just working with the body, we're working with the mind, and we're getting to understand our clients and getting to understand what makes them tick and how to get into their brain. And I think that's a very important part. And you wrote a book. Do you cover any of that in your book about, exactly like working with your clients from a mental perspective?
Yeah, well, in my book, I come at it from an interesting perspective because a little bit about my background. So I'm from Hong Kong and I was born here. And then I went to the US for 10 years for school. And so I like to think I have a mixture of both the Eastern and Western way of thinking. And a few years ago, I came across Michael Phelps and his picture with the cupping marks on his back, right? And I think that's kind of when the fitness community blew up because all of a sudden they were interested in all these Oriental recovery methods like cupping, gua sha or scraping and acupuncture. And I can tell you from a person growing up in Hong Kong, Chinese medicine was kind of this alternative and mystical philosophy because, whenever you would ask a Chinese medicine practitioner, oh, okay, so all these herbs, why are we drinking it? And what's the tangible benefits of me consuming all these herbal tea other than the fact that it was disgusting and bitter, right? And usually they'll be like, oh, it's good for you. Just don't ask. And I find that was the way it was with Chinese medicine. And certainly, even when Michael Phelps came, there were two perspectives and one on the exercise science part. So people looked at soft tissue. And then the other perspective was the Chinese medicine perspective. And I saw an opportunity there because I realized that a lot of people, when it comes to fitness community, they're misinformed about Chinese medicine. And so I decided to team up with a Chinese medicine practitioner to explore strength and conditioning and recovery in details from the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine. And what we say in the book is, so now coming back to the topic of coaching or mental side of things, we explore the connection between our diet, our emotions, and our training. Because what we say is that as a person who's striving for better athletic performance or human performance overall, we cannot neglect the fact that everything is intricately linked. And yet that's what we are currently doing, or most of us, many of us anyways, in the fitness industry. So that will be the central message. And that is the mental side and our training are intricately linked, which is also influenced by our diet.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's all interconnected. I think the difficult part is that, let's say I'm 21 years old. I become a National Academy of Sports Medicine certified personal trainer. I might have a background in the body, let's say from a kinesiology standpoint, but if I haven't worked with people yet, I don't understand that mental side. And maybe I don't have a nutrition background. So I'm not really always able to integrate those things. So you have to sort of learn on the job and start working with people before you get all of those things. And I think another big part of it, I talk about this a lot too, is networking within the personal training community, right? Having a registered dietitian or a chiropractor or a Chinese medicine specialist and all these different people who are interconnected in the community who know those things better than you, so you can learn from them and then help your client with those little tidbits of information. Did you have people that you learned underneath from some of those other things?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, what is important is, yes, definitely the network, because you always want to refer out if necessary when something's definitely beyond your scope. But for me, I like to grab coffee with different people, and sometimes I think it's more of an ego thing, right? Where we're afraid to just reach out to a physical therapist and be like, hey, let's grab coffee. But for me, I have no shame, so I'll just reach out and say, hey, can we grab coffee? And what you'll find is people love sharing their expertise. And so, for me, I grabbed coffee just 2 months ago. I was having coffee with a dietitian and I asked her some questions. And so I would say, yes, I won't say I learned from anyone specifically, because I do meet so many people, but to anyone listening, definitely, first of all, when you take the NASM courses, as someone without or with background in exercise science, there's a lot of information in that course. And it is only through taking more courses that you can begin to even start to understand human body more, right? So, and then after that, you want to network with different people. So you learn different insights, because everyone has a different way to go about it. That's what I learned.
Yeah, totally. And this is a question I ask everybody who's interconnected in our field who comes on this podcast. So I'm not putting you on the spot. I ask everybody this. Okay. How do you feel about people giving out nutritional information in sort of the new landscape of the online world? Because, let me unpack that a little bit. From a National Academy of Sports Medicine standpoint, originally, they say you're not supposed to, as a personal trainer, you should be a registered dietitian or certified nutrition specialist, somebody who has those certifications and degrees. But now the National Academy of Sports Medicine gives out weight loss specialist and certified nutrition degrees, like specialties and all these different certifications, because they see the money in it and they know where it is. And you look on everybody's Instagram, they're all giving out this information. So it's tricky to me. I know it's very nuanced, but how do you feel about it? And do you give out specific information to clients about nutrition?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and great observation. And for that reason, I try to stay away from social media as much as possible, because what I find is, on the connection between mental side and the body, we know that when we're in a sympathetic state, or when we're in that fight or flight, it kind of stiffens up the body. So if I'm just on social media the whole day, then I get so aggravated that it just stiffens me up. But on the topic of diet, for me, it's a matter of principles. I think it is totally fine if we share our general principles. And what you find is, I believe that general principles go a long way when it comes to diet, because, we've been eating for thousands of years, and there's been dietary practices that has lasted this long. So for me, it's principles, and I'm against giving specific advice, especially in the US, right? That's so tightly regulated. If we're in Hong Kong, for example, it is not as tightly regulated. And so people can give all the dietary advice they want without getting into legal trouble. But I think in the US, they have a good system set up, and that is only qualified professionals can give relevant advice. And yet, of course, in a legalistic society, people always have ways to get around that, right? By having a few disclaimers. So for me, I think that whenever you're giving advice that you're not an expert on, you're ultimately harming others rather than actually benefiting them. So just keep that in mind whenever you want to give an advice that you're not an expert on.
I think it's great information. And it's the same thing that I echo to all the young personal trainers that I talk to, because nowadays they really want to delve into the nutrition side. That's what gets a lot of the personal trainers into it. Actually, you find them actually gravitating towards nutrition, but maybe they don't have the money or the time, or maybe they just don't think they can pass the classes to become a registered dietitian. So instead they become a personal trainer, but then they try to handle people's diets more than the personal training side. But eventually you have to really leave those things, like you said, to the registered dietitians or the certified nutrition specialists, because for all you know, your client could have some sort of issue that is well beyond your pay grade. And like you said, you could be giving them bad information that's a disservice long-term to their health and wellness. But let's talk about some of those principles, like the law of thermodynamics, right? We understand that, right? Obviously, calories in, calories out, those things you can pass on to clients. And I'm sure you do things like that. And then overall quality of food, right? We explain the differences in the quality of food. And I think that's okay as a personal trainer. Do you agree?
I definitely agree. I mean, if you look at human history, I would say that if we are fresh and organic food, we're going to be okay, because all the modern health problems, I would say it comes down to sugar and the lack of exercise. So if we just eat less processed foods, which means if we consume organic food, there's only so much sugar in the food, right? So I think if we stick to just organic food and stay away from all the fried food as well, I think it will go a long way, as you said.
Tell me a little bit about the health and fitness scene in Hong Kong, in China, in areas surrounding there. What is the big differences or a bunch of major differences that you can see from sort of the Americanized culture of fitness and health, or is there none? Is there an overlap between the two?
I think there's a big overlap because obviously the fitness industry in America, it's the gold standard, and it's the benchmark for the rest of the world to see. But I would say that the fundamental difference is the way that people, the perspective that people have on health and fitness. So if I can elaborate, let's say if I'm working with a female. So in the US, people are all about having nicer physique, right? Maybe a tone, maybe better looking glutes for the beach or something, right? Or more curvy, or just something, a nicer body aesthetically speaking.
Yeah. But
in Hong Kong, people are afraid of that because they think that by doing, 2 sets of squats, they're going to become like a Hulk. And I am sure there's this demographic as well in the US, especially when it comes to female clientele, but I'll say this is definitely more prominent in Hong Kong, right? I used to teach a lot of group classes, sometimes 8 classes in a row. And when I first began my fitness career, I worked at a all women or 9% women fitness center. So majority of the concern is, if I do this exercise, is that going to make my hips super big? And I don't want that. So I would say the beauty standard is a bit different. And the same with the guys. I think people don't really want to be that jacked per se, and rather they want to be lean and have some muscles, but not too over bulky, if that makes sense. So I think that overall it comes down to beauty standards and the way that people perceive what's good looking.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. From different cultures are going to sort of appreciate different things or tend to gravitate towards certain looks and aesthetics. But yeah, like you said, there is certainly a portion of the demographic. I think it's fading. I think, there was a lot of women who originally thought, I'm going to get too big if I lift, right? And I'm going to bulk up. But I think the education is just there now. People know that that's not the case, that there are guys who have been training their entire lives to get big and gain 20 pounds of muscle, and they still can't. So you're not going to pick up a weight in 2 days and be able to do that. But what about from less of a vanity perspective? Let's talk more about a health perspective. Are you dealing with people, specifically you as a personal trainer, who are older and aging? Do the people in the 50s and 60s and 70s where you are gravitate towards exercise? Or is this a new trend where you're talking only about people in their 20s and 30s and 40s?
Well, Steve, that is a great question. Yeah. I'd say that the spectrum is quite wide. Certainly in my clientele, up until I would say 2 years ago, most of my clients are under 40, 90%. But over these past few years, as I'm growing in my reputation, I realized that the spectrum has gotten wider as more people is interested in working with me. But I would say, the spectrum is wide and everybody's training, which is a good sign. But there's definitely room for improvement in what to do, because I think that part is still lacking, as a lot of people are still gravitating towards maybe bodybuilding type workouts. And certainly we know that the fitness career or the fitness industry has evolved into different methodologies and different trains of thoughts.
Well, now that we're here, you brought it up. Let's talk about it a little bit, because I believe, before I even hear your answer, that we're going to totally agree on this. I talk about this a lot in the podcast. There was sort of the 70s, 80s, 90s bodybuilding prescription of exercise. Let's do 12, 10, 8, 6 repetitions. Let's keep increasing the load. It's all about hypertrophy, sort of moving in one plane of motion, building muscle. But now we know that ultimately for long-term health and wellness, it's more about mobility. It's about moving your body. We need transverse plane. We need frontal plane. We need to do more things to make sure that our shoulders and our hips are moving in all directions, right? They're ball and socket. And people like you, I think, are pushing that. Am I correct? This is what you believe in?
You're absolutely spot on. So in terms of the clientele that I work with in Hong Kong, currently 90% of my clients are golfers. And I know that is a unique niche to get into. But I got into it about 3-4 years ago. And people would come in, and in the beginning, when I first started being in this niche, because I worked at the Clearwater Bay Golf and Country Club, one of the top clubs in Asia, as a fitness instructor. And one of the concerns was that, if I build up muscle, is that going to make my swing slow? Or is that going to slow down my swing speed? Or is that going to limit the range of motion that I have? Because, bulky guys, they tend to not move very well. And usually I'll tell them an illustration, and that is the fact that when you train your body to go slow, your body will go slow. When you train your body to go fast, obviously it will go fast. And in traditional bodybuilding workouts, you have to make the movements more inefficient, because it is through inefficient movements that you could target specific muscles that you can make it grow. Yet, if we look at the latest trends in exercise science and the way that fitness community is evolving, we'll know that we have to train our bodies to move better. Because when it comes to a golf swing, if you have done any biomechanical courses, then you will know that the golf swing or any sport in that matter is all about utilizing the ground, right? I can move my body all I want, but ultimately it's all about how I interact with the ground. And inside the gym, if I want to do something that could translate to better performance, I better do something that, one, helps me move better, and two, helps me utilize the ground better. And usually whenever I say this, they're sold because they're like, whoa, I've never heard of this. Whatever you do, just get me, let's start doing it. But the point remains, right? People, they could work on their hips, and certainly for my golfers or for people who play baseball or tennis, they might be on the cable machine doing all these funky types of rotation.
Yeah.
But Dr. Kwan, so a biomechanist from Texas University, he would tell you, sometimes we get so focused into how our hips are moving that we forgot that the hips is just an indicator of how we're interacting with the ground. So the next time we look at a baseball swing, we look at a golf swing, people try to change the way they rotate, but ultimately it's how they're using their legs. So that's what I try to get across to the clients. It's all about movement and how we utilize the ground.
Yeah, that's great information. And to talk a little bit about that golf niche and then work backwards and talk about the biomechanics, I think it's one of the best niches to go into. Number one, golfers usually have a lot of money and they're willing to do, right? Yeah. And they're willing to do whatever they can to spend. And when I say golfers, I mean you're talking your corporate types, right? So your guys who are, CEOs, or maybe they're retired now and all they do is play golf. So they're spending thousands of dollars on golf a year easily, right? They're members of all these high level clubs. They're buying expensive equipment. They're getting lessons. And sort of the last moving piece in that is their fitness, right? You pitch that to them, say, hey, you have all these other things down. All you need to do to get a little bit better is start working on the fitness portion and the biomechanical portion. So I think it's a great niche to go into for a lot of reasons. And were you a golfer prior to going into this, or did you sort of see it how I saw it and say, like, this is a great group of people to like grab a hold of?
Yeah. Well, for about 4 or 5 years ago, I used to play a lot of soccer. I almost became a professional soccer player here in Hong Kong. And actually that's what led me to training, because I realized this things that I was doing inside the gym was not transferring to better performance, because I was doing bodybuilding type training and it slowed me down.
Yeah. And
after I was done with that, I didn't get a contract. I was like, oh, I need to pick a new sport to get into. And at the time I had about 1 or 2 golfing clients. And, I was like, I think we all know people who play golf, they're crazy about golf. They're like hooked and they're addicted. And those, when I'm in Hong Kong, I'll go on the subway, and true story, sometimes you just see these random people, they're out there practicing their swinging motion exactly while waiting for the bus or the subway. And only people who play golf can relate. And people who don't play golf would think that these people are nuts. And so I was like, what better way to understand it than to actually take some lessons? So I took 20 lessons with a golf coach. Unfortunately, he wasn't PGA certified, so I still have bad fundamentals. So again, an important, valuable lesson is whenever you take lessons, doesn't matter the sport or fitness, do it with a qualified professional, because I was led astray, bad fundamentals. But in a way, it's good because now I understand what bad fundamentals do for you, right? And ever since playing that, I love the sport. And then I wrote an email to Clearwater Bay Golf and Country Club, telling them my qualifications, and they're like, oh yeah, definitely, we would love you to we'd love to have you on the team. Worked there for 3 years, and then now I'm working at another club.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about your clients that are just general population. So somebody who is not a golfer, maybe they're a weekend golfer, but they're just coming to you for overall long-term health and wellness and fitness and to lose a few pounds. Are you still doing a lot of these sort of movement-based exercises with them and sort of staying away from heavy weights? And talk a little bit about what you would do with someone in general population.
Yeah, I remember once reading Mike Boyle's book, and he talked about the 80-20 principle. And that is, people always talk about all these specific exercises for sports, but in fact, 80% of people will do the same thing. So it's just the 20% that is specific to the sport. And certainly I think that's the case for my clients. I think 80% of people will do the same movement-based training. And sometimes that could be heavy, that could be light, because heavy or light is just a load that they have on. But I would say if let's say I'm working with a client who is here for fat loss, then perhaps we'll add in a few interval trainings as well, just to get the heart rate up, because I still think the heart rate is an objective and it's easy to measure our progress and the workload that we've placed on the body. So overall, yep, it's still based on movement-based training. But even then, I still do the big three and the Olympic lifts. And you'll be surprised, even my 50-year-old, 60-year-olds, we try to get them to do some ballistic and some variations of Olympic movements. So
I like how you hit on load, and you said, well, sometimes that's a light load or a heavy load. And I think, what that gets to is that going through all of the motions is the most important thing. The load is secondary, right? So push, pull, hinge, lunge, rotate, plank. We know all these movements we have to get our body into. Whether you load that movement up or not is client dependent, right? It's their specific anatomics, it's their goals, it's where they're at in their sort of fitness, like career, for lack of a better term, right? That's when we decide the load we're going to use. But the load should be secondary to making sure us as fitness professionals get them moving in all directions.
You're absolutely spot on. And I think that's also a misconception, especially when we work with an older clientele. Because let's say if it's just, let's say if I'm working with a golfer, again, because I work with so many golfers, and we just spend an hour doing rotational exercises, and we don't even do something heavy. It might just be a rotation plus a punch on a cable, for example. And there, what I'm in the back of my mind, I'm trying to teach them to generate force from the legs, so they have to push off the ground, transfer force through the core, and then use their arms at the end. And obviously, I don't tell them all of these because it's too overwhelming for just a beginner client to know. But then they'll question, why are we doing such a lightweight? But I can tell you 10 out of 10 times after 4 or 5 weeks, when the other patient comes in, they'll be like, oh, I'm actually moving better. And when they move better, they get better results inside the gym and certainly on the golf course. So I think, yeah, load is secondary. For me, it is always, can they master the movement first?
Yeah. I mean, it's efficiency of the motion, right? I can promise you, I'm stronger than Floyd Mayweather because I weigh a lot more than him. All right. I'm 6 foot. I weigh 185 pounds. He is 5'7" and he weighs 140 pounds, but I can't punch harder than Floyd Mayweather, although I do kickbox. Why? Because he's way more efficient at the motion than I am. He's thrown 3 million jabs before in his life. And it's not because he's stronger. It's because of sort of the neural patterns and the connectivity. Of course, there's strength involved in that, right? He's probably stronger for his size than the average person for his size. But I think that's a good way I try to describe what you just said to my clients, is that, smaller guys can punch harder, and it's not because they're necessarily stronger. They don't bench press more. They're using the anatomics of their body and the neural connections that they've built up through tens and tens of thousands of repetitions.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, one thing that I talk about in my book, Dynamic Balance, is that if you look at human movement, if you look across all sports, right, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, Roger Federer, LeBron James, when they're producing a lot of power, it's almost like their movements are graceful because it is always in sync and in coordination, and it's always so elegant. And I know elegant perhaps is not the word to describe a punch, but if you look at the way they generate force, it is beauty. And in that way, I would say that an important emphasis that I definitely put on movement is you have to be in the flow and you have to be elegant in the way you do things. Because if you're just kind of choppy and chunky, then we'll know that you're not utilizing or you're not maximizing what you're supposed to do.
Totally. Yeah. Fluid is the word that I use. And when they're nice and fluid, you can see that. And I actually think, as a trainer, it's gotten me a lot of clients. What I mean by that is when I'm in the gym and I'm working out, there are movements that I am very fluid at. And I've done them, 30, 40, 50,000 times. And people can recognize it. They know it. They see something there. They see that movement. I've seen other people do that, but that guy does that movement way better. There's something about that movement that we just recognize in those patterns. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it is a sort of an adaptation from an evolutionary perspective, but it is funny how, like you said, you notice when Federer hits that serve or LeBron goes up for that dunk or whoever it is, Floyd Mayweather throws that punch, it just looks different.
Yeah. And so I think when it comes to whatever sport you're doing, even in Olympic weightlifting movements, right? People think that, I might be doing clean and jerk with 200 kilograms over my head. But even when you look at them, they would say that the movement's quite poetic because it's all about me being in the flow, being connected to the barbell and thrusting it up. So
tell me a little bit about speaking and conferences and things like this. How did you get into this? And I know you said that you'll just ask anybody out for a cup of coffee to learn anything, and that there's nothing you're afraid of. I'm sure that helps being on stage. But were you asked to speak your first time? Did you kind of reach out to somebody? How did this all get started?
Yeah, this all got started when I was teaching group classes. So I actually work for the distributor in Hong Kong, and the distributor, they distribute NASM courses, PowerPlay, TRX, Trigger Point, Viper, you name basically all the major fitness companies, and Optimum Form Studio, the company that I work for, I still do. They're the distributor for that. And at the time, one of the educators, she had to leave for health reasons. And so there was an open spot, there was a vacancy. But back then, I was only 2-3 years into the industry. So I didn't think much about it. I didn't think that this would be the route that I would go, because it is quite different to be teaching versus talking. Because essentially, being an educator, your job is to talk and to communicate. And that's never easy. So, but then Kevin Rushton, my boss, he asked me if I would like to attend a PowerPlate Master Trainer conference. And this happened in Bangkok, Thailand. And well, although you don't really want to go in it, if someone offers you the opportunity, you're not going to say no. That's always been my philosophy. Why not just give it a try? Because the worst thing I could do is fail, and even failure, there's no big deal around it. And so I went to Bangkok, and I met these guys from PowerPlate, and then different trainers from different countries, and I learned so much, and I had so much inspiration. And those were, number one, those trainers that PowerPlate sent, they were educated, they were good presenters, and so they're both knowledgeable trainers and good presenters. And that's kind of where I had my inspirations on, because I realized that some of the courses that I've taken, perhaps here in Hong Kong, these guys might be good trainers, but they're terrible communicators. Because you sit there, you're like, what am I learning? I'm falling asleep, and they're just bragging about themselves. And so I had a clear direction. And ever since then, in different courses that I teach, I do try to work on my communication so that it is more interactive, and I don't become the very guy that I hated.
Yeah, I've been to so many of these certification courses. I'm also PowerPlate certified. I have like every TRX certification you can imagine. And the ones that stick with me aren't the movements I've learned. It's the presenters that were dynamic. That's the certifications I remember. There was one or two special ones. One was a TRX certification, and one was actually like an aqua class certification. And I just remember how dynamic the instructors were teaching it. And it's not about the sort of anatomical things that I can read. It's not about like the positions they're telling me about their bodies. I can look at that stuff on YouTube, but you steal so many things from the presenters about not only how I can be better at presenting, but at being a fitness professional. Because ultimately, if you're teaching group fitness, you're always presenting, right? Because you have to be on, and everyone's looking at you, and it's important to really hold the attention of everybody in the class.
Yeah, and I can be honest here in sharing. For a while after going to, so all of the companies, TRX, PowerPlate, Trigger Point, National Academy of Sports, I'm the master trainer for that company for those companies in Hong Kong. And for a while, I still struggled. I struggled with my identity, because in the fitness industry, certainly when I go out the street, I'm not the best looking guy. I'm not that big. And sometimes you question whether there's a place for me in the fitness industry. And also you go on to the fitness community and you see so many high energy individuals, right? They might be like, so the energy is just spot on. And for a while I had to consider what's good for me. And certainly over the past 4 or 5 years, I find that on the coaching side, I know on the technical side, my niche is golf fitness, right? But on the coaching side, I really found that being a good listener and just a good communicator really gets me a long way. So, sometimes I had this 2 years ago, right? One of my colleagues in the gym, she was straightforward. She's like, "Oh, Andy, when I look at you, you're not the most energetic guy and you're not the best looking guy. How come you get so many opportunities?" And at the moment, I didn't appreciate the bluntness, because it's like, you didn't have to hurt me like that. But at the same way, it's good. Maybe she was genuinely interested in what she could do, but she had too much ego, essentially. And so I told her, well, first of all, we talk too much. And I know that our job as a group instructor is to talk a lot, but we also have to be perceptive to the environment, right? You have to gauge what do the participants want from me. And 2, you have to make a connection with everyone. And even though I taught 6-7 group classes a day, I try my best to remember people's names and their habit. And we know that our minds work in association. So if I see Steve, now I pair Steve up with golf. So even if I see you in 5 years, I'll be like, how's your golf? And in just this one simple practice, we develop a connection, because then now, Steve, you know I care because I remember that you play golf. And if you could do that with every single client, this is a great starter, because then you've developed that connection, and over time that connection turns into trust, and with trust, you can do a lot.
Yeah, and just again, piggyback on that point, I couldn't agree more. I echo all those thoughts, but some of us are maybe not meant to do both. I think they're not the same beast, right? Personal training and group fitness are a little bit different. So to have the skill sets, you, Andy, are obviously somebody who always tries to challenge yourself, right? You're doing a lot in the fitness industry. You're trying to grow. You're trying to be, you're a presenter on top of this. You obviously want to get better, but for some people, they may have to just stick to one area or the other. And when I say this is, I'm sure you've met these people before who are just absolute geniuses. They can look at the body and say, I see knee valgus. I see your shoulders going forward. Your pecs are too tight, right? You have, cervical column issues. Your neck is sticking forward. They're almost like a physical therapist, but there's something off in the sort of the personality realm, right? They just don't have it. And they're not going to be great in group fitness. They're not going to be able to walk into a TRX class with 20 people and put on good music and get everything going. And that's fine, because they can do assessments and they can be a corrective exercise specialist, right? There's a route for them. And other people might just not have that brain where they can do all those things I just talked about. Well, then group fitness might be more for you if you don't have that sort of corrective exercise mindset. Luckily for you, Andy, you seem like you have both, which is great. And I think you found out, though, sort of the hard way. You put yourself in these situations and pushed yourself. And I think that's the only way for people to do it, is to say, I have to do a little bit of everything. Let me do some group fitness. Let me do some personal training. Let me go through these things and then find out, can I do all these? If not, let me go towards the route where my skill sets are better served for long-term success.
I agree with you. But I think we also have to know, we also have to pay more respect to the other fields, right? Meaning sometimes when you're in a commercial gym, you have the personal trainers and you have the group instructors. And sometimes they like to bash on each other, right? Personal trainers, they think that, group instructors, they're just these energetic, 5 reps. And that's a class. Well, there's so much skill set and art in motivating class. And on the other hand, personal trainers tend to be more detail oriented, tend to be more focused, more technical, and more scientific in a way. And so I think group instructors also have to recognize that it takes a lot of skills for a good personal trainer to develop, to deliver his or her session. So I would say that if there is more respect, that would be better than currently, because people have this mindset of thinking, I'm just going to be a personal trainer, or I'm just going to be a group class instructor. But if we can learn a bit more from both sides, if we can be more dynamic as an instructor, I think opportunities will come, and you'll be surprised at what you're actually good at. Because I know I'm going off a tangent here, but on this topic of niche, people ask me all the time, since I'm the educator, they'll come up and be like, Andy, should I pick my niche early on, or what should I do? How should I go about picking my niche? I always refer them back to the book Range by David Epstein. And it's all about how
I have it on my bookshelf. Love it.
Yeah, love it. It's all about generalists, right? You look at all these athletes, all these famous athletes, and a lot of times you have to explore. And certainly in my personal story, I didn't pick my niche until 2-3 years ago, which is 5 years into the industry. And you don't really know who walks into your door. And like for me, it just so happens that I've never had a bodybuilding client, which is absurd in a way, because, it's kind of weird. It's uncommon in the fitness industry for someone to not have clients with bodybuilding goals, but I haven't had any yet. So what I suggest is those niche will come, but it's only from you learning different things. At first, I didn't want to be a group class instructor, but once you become a group class instructor, you sort of learn of the formula, if you will. But that's trial and error. That's a lot of courses, again, more money. But then I would say the returns are great, because you can be dynamic and you won't be bored as well. Because let's say if you're a personal trainer today and you are delivering like 8 sessions a day and you're working six days a week. And at some point, you also want a different challenge. So yes, I would say that we're naturally built for one or the other, depending on our personality, because personality has a big influence on what we do. But at the same time, don't be afraid to try something new, because you'll be surprised by what you get at.
Totally. Yeah. And, I have 25,000 hours of one-on-one personal training experience and more if we're including group classes. And I've never worked with someone in Olympic lifting. Why? Because I don't really Olympic lift. So when someone came to me who wanted those things, I sent them to someone else who was going to be better at teaching the snatch and things of that nature, right? Because they're not exercises that I do on a regular basis. I work with, majority of my clients are seniors. I do work with a lot of golfers, but seniors are not the people who are going to be doing Olympic lifting, right? So anyway, so just to sort of add to your point where there's going to be things that we don't do right away, it is good to do a little bit of everything and then find your niche. And I think, I know this sounds corny, but your niche will find you. Because if you're in the industry long enough and you're doing the right things, you're eventually going to bump into the thing like you did that either fits you perfectly or it's a time thing too. It's not just what do I love? It also has to be a time thing because you can love something, but it might not be the best for your niche because let's go ahead and say you're surrounded on an island where everyone's golfing, right? And your niche is teaching ballet. You want to teach ballet, but you're a National Academy of Sports Medicine certified personal trainer, right? And you also want to help ballet people, but there's nobody in that area who does ballet. Well, that's not going to get you any money, unfortunately. So sometimes it's a timing thing. And then also nobody regulated anybody to one niche. So you can start as a generalist and then you could pick a path, but if that path doesn't work out for you, it's fine, right? You just go on and you choose another path down the road. And it's been done many of times by many of people. And it's no one's going to call you out that you changed your niche at some point.
You're right. And I also want to encourage people to, read more business books, because essentially if we are a fitness instructor, yes, I know that we are meant to be health and fitness professionals. But at the same time, if we are trying to grow our brand as a fitness instructor, then a lot of it is business. And I think one of the common pitfalls that people fall into is this idea of stubbornness, right? Let's say if they're generalists and they've picked a niche, like you just said, Steve, and they go into that niche and they decide to teach ballet in the golfing island. And the stubborn one will keep doing it because they think that's their niche and that's their identity. But the smart ones, after giving it sufficient time, obviously you have to try first. They would say, this isn't working out. They drop their ego and they'll say, I'll work on something else. So, and I think this is more of a business sense than it is anything else. So I would encourage anyone to read more business books if they're into developing their career, because I think it's invaluable.
Yeah. And part of that, and this is a business technique, is let's say you're going to work in a particular place, right? I'm just going to call it Bob's Gym. Do some investigation on the front end and see what they're missing. And if it happens to also be something you like, well, then you could present that to them. So for example, if you go in and you go, I see that you guys have no women only classes here at this place. Well, guess what? This is what I do. I teach women only classes that are directed towards women in their 40s, and it's like, okay, well, that's the niche you pitch. I think it's important to investigate where you could potentially be working. And that's from other perspectives too. So, I've had people, I used to interview people who would come in and they would be like a different certification that everyone else had. Let's say everyone had NASM, they would have ACE or something. And they were sort of worried about that. They were like, oh, like, I'm sorry, like I have a different, it's like, no. Use that to your advantage. Say, I bring a different perspective. I've learned different things than all these other trainers. So I can bring something new to the company, right? It's all about finding a way to pitch yourself in a better light. And you're not lying. You're not making this stuff up. You're sort of manipulating what the situation is going on to be advantageous for you, which ultimately is going to help build your business.
Oh, absolutely spot on, Steve. I think we try so hard to fit in, but yet if you fit in, you're not going to differentiate yourself from the others, right? So, it's like a lot of fitness instructors, they take to social media, they do all these generic ads and all these generic videos, but it turns out to be the same as everyone else. So why would they come to you? And definitely do the research. And if you can bring something to the table, that's when you shine. And if you just bring the same food to the table that everyone else already has, then no one's going to, want to eat with you or eat your food.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So let's talk about the books a little bit. I wrote a book called Fitness Business 101. It's right behind me. You have one book or two books?
One book.
You have a book. So tell me about the process in starting to write this book. Did you find it to be different than you originally thought it was going to be? Did you get stuck in some sort of stalemates at periods and have to continue? How long did it take? Just anything that comes to mind when writing this book.
Yeah, Diet Balance took 3 years to write. And part of it, I think, was because I'll have a busy schedule, and because I have to work with a co-author. And if you have worked with anyone before, then you know that working with people in general is quite hard because of communication. And I'll say that the toughest part is that I work with a Chinese medicine practitioner who has a PhD in Chinese medicine. So she was very academically focused. And sometimes both of us, when we're writing, will kind of, because we're so accustomed to the idea of school. So whenever we write, we'll be like, oh, how many pages? Or what do you want? Mm-hmm. But, when you're writing a book, this doesn't apply, because you have to write as long as you can, as long as people understand. Right. So that could be 2 sentences, that could be 2 paragraphs, that could be 20 pages. So I think that was definitely a big challenge. 1, the length, and 2, because our book centers around Chinese medicine. So there are a lot of translation issues. And as a result, because of that, we take more of a cultural dive into the language of Chinese, because we always think, well, for example, let's say we use the word qi. Right. I think people are familiar with this word, but only the word, because we don't really understand the concept. And then people take you to this whole abstract concept of what qi is. And so our job in the book is to just say, well, actually, every word in Chinese medicine has 2 contexts, or two meanings: 1, a functional meaning; 2, a philosophical meaning. So when it comes to qi, it is the energy currency similar to ATP, but because people in China did not have lab equipment that could help them look at ATP or blood sugar level, etc., so they used the word qi. On the philosophical side, there was more of a philosophy, because we're talking about energy that sustains the body. So it is through this lens that we try to unpack all these concepts, because let's say if people are to buy cupping, or to use cupping techniques, or if they're to do acupuncture, if they're to do any soft tissue work that is of Oriental origin, if they can only understand the Western perspective, I think they're not getting the complete picture. And for me, the best health and fitness professionals are the ones who has a comprehensive understanding of different perspectives. So that's what we try to do. But of course, to do this requires a lot of hard work than we previously imagined, because then you end up explaining so many things. And well, let me tell you, when we first give the proposal to 3 publishers, they all say that our proposal was a bit thin. The word count was just not enough for a publication. But then a year down the line, when we worked with the developmental editor, our book was twice as long as it should be. So it'll be 2 volume, because we had too many words, so we had to cut it down. So, all that to say, I think explaining another philosophy is super tough because of the translation. But at the same time, because we're trying to educate the Western audience into something that most people are not familiar with, it is rewarding, especially now hearing the feedback that people give.
That's really interesting. So every Chinese medicine and health related word has 2 definitions: a philosophical one and sort of a more direct practical one. Is that what you said?
That is right. I mean, if you think about the yin yang sign, I always use that as an example. The yin yang sign that could be seen in the most obscure places in America, and yet functionally it just means the forces of opposite yet complementary, right? When we apply it to training, it could just be a strenuous workout versus a recovery session, yin and yang. And those 2 are important. You can't just say, I'm going to have strenuous workouts every day without no recovery, because then your body will not be able to adapt. But yet it is also a philosophical concept, because you talk about complementary yet contradictory forces. So, you think of it that way, then you'll find, okay, so there's both a practical meaning and more of a poetic meaning.
Yeah, it has to be really difficult. Obviously, the book is targeted, you correct me if I'm wrong, for Americans, right? And for the West. Now, when you're writing this, when you're sitting down, are the editors looking at this? Are they American editors who are looking at this saying hey, we read through this book, we're a little bit confused, maybe you should change things? Or are these editors, were they Hong Kong based?
Yep. So our publisher is Greenleaf Book Group. They're based in Texas, and we had 4 editors for our book. And none of them play sports. None of them have fitness backgrounds, which is great, because not only are we explaining Chinese medicine concept to Americans, we're explaining to Americans without fitness backgrounds. So, if they can understand our concepts, then we're confident that anyone could, because we're able to explain, people who didn't know what anatomy is. I remember we would use some terms like quadriceps, and they'd be like, why are you using quadriceps? This is too expert level. This is too advanced. And we're like, no. I can guarantee you quadriceps, it's fine.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. I mean, I could only imagine what a trip that must have been going down that path. But like you said, it's all worth it in the end if you're having good reviews and people are coming back to you and telling you how much they appreciate it. And I'm sure you learned along the process too. Obviously, you're working with a PhD in Chinese medicine. I'm sure she taught you things that you didn't think you were going to know, and your perspective probably helped her in ways that she didn't know.
Absolutely spot on. And I also want to encourage anyone listening to try out new stuff, right? I think a lot of times we're frightened by the idea to write a book. And I know, Steve, you can attest to this as well. It's not that hard once you put in the work. I mean, it is difficult, but of course, you learn so much from it that the experience in itself, regardless of sales, I mean, it might be great if there's sales with it, but even without the sales, you've already learned so much that could carry over to everyday life. So, if you're listening, just don't be afraid to try new stuff.
Yeah, it's a big issue. The trying new stuff, and then also sort of the imposter syndrome thing, where people will get halfway there, and then they'll stop because they're afraid that it's just not them or it doesn't look right. And you need to have the mentality that Andy has and say, I don't really care. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to ask that person to go get a cup of coffee with me, and if they say no, they say no, and I'll ask the next physical therapist, because this is just life, and you only live once. And try it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
Yeah. And I always think we're always one email away from the next big thing. And
yeah.
And certainly if you want something, just send them an email. Obviously you want to strategize, right? Like, for example, when I was asking for the endorsements for my book, so I was able to get a 5-time Olympian in writing an endorsement for the book, and people would be like, whoa, that's amazing. Did you know her personally? I said, no, it was just a cold email. And most people would be afraid to cold email someone asking for something because they think that, oh, I'm not asking for a favor. But if you just believe in yourself, believe in your product, and just be a bit thick-skinned and strategize the way you write that email, opportunities will definitely come your way.
Yeah, it's sort of a story in the 4-Hour Work Week, the Tim Ferriss book. I don't know if you've read that, but he talks about how he had some basically professor in one of his Ivy League classes that said there's only one assignment for the year. You have to get the most famous person you can on the phone and record the message or something, or get an email from them, something like that. But you have to be, so the whole class had to compete. I think the grades were commiserate with how famous the person was. So if you got, Oprah Winfrey, you got an A. And if you got some C-level actress, you got a D. So I forget, he got Bill Clinton or somebody on the phone, the American president. So, and it was one of those things where it's you'd be surprised, a few emails in one direction, you find a secretary or something, or a friend of a friend who kind of knows them, and then they put the right word in, and before you know it, you get that phone call. So it's, no one else is trying. And that's the thing. And that's the other thing in sort of the high level sort of speaking world, which looks like you're entering into. Nobody's trying to do that. Most people are afraid to speak. Most people don't want to do it. So you can get speaking gigs very easily because people aren't trying to do this, especially if you're not trying to charge for them, right? If you're like, hey, I'm willing to come there, I'm willing to put on this show and speak a little bit for your crowd. These are my credentials. And then you sort of build your portfolio as an intern. And then before you know it, you'll get paid to speak. So.
Yeah, and definitely don't rush it, right? When in the beginning, people often get so caught up on the pay. They think it's professional to ask for, what's the pay? Let me see my availability. But, if you think about, if you're on the other hand of the phone call, if you're asking for an opportunity to give a speaking gig, you better show that you're enthusiastic and you actually want to be there. And so don't get so caught up on the money, because I always think that it will come eventually if you do the right things.
What does Andy's career look like over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? If you have it your way, where do you think you'll be? Are you going to continue training golfers? Do you want to do 3 or 4 different things? It looks like you're a guy who likes to do a little group fitness, a little personal training, a little speaking. Are you going to sort of narrow down and pigeonhole into one specific thing in health and fitness?
Yeah, so I haven't told anyone this, but I guess I'll tell you, Steve, on the podcast. Well, I guess anyone could know now. So I'm looking into working with the former Hong Kong team golf coach in delivering some strength and conditioning programs, because we're looking to help high school athletes in getting scholarships for golf. And that's on the table currently. So that's why I've been doing all these golf biomechanics course, because I needed to kind of deepen my understanding a little bit more on the technical aspects of the swing. And that's a project I'm actively working on. And personal training wise, I guess it will just be the same. I'll probably do less group classes because I feel like as age comes, I just don't have the energy or as much energy to do it, especially to the standard that I would like to do, given that I'm not the most extroverted person on earth already. So, and also have a 16-month kid. So I do want to, oh, thank you. And so I do want to do more personal training and stuff. So definitely that personal training, and 5 years later, hopefully I'll have another course on coaching, because that's my next passion that I want to perhaps write a book, do a course on, because I think that there are not enough good communicators in the fitness industry. And if we can train up better communicators, then I think the industry will progress forward. And ultimately, that's what my passion is. And that's what I try to bring to the table.
That's fantastic, Andy. Let my audience know where they can find everything about you, from websites to IG to anywhere else that's best to find you and your book.
Sure. So my book, Dynamic Balance, is available everywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Hudson. I see that's even in Target now, target.com. So that's good if you have a Target reward card. And my Instagram is TichuAndy. So my first name, TSZCHIU, and then Andy. And then my website is chichu.com. So after reading Dynamic Balance, or if you have any questions in regards to the way I train or just career development, feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you.
I'll have the links to the book, as well as the website and the IG and everything else that Andy just mentioned. My guest today has been Andy. Thanks so much for joining the TrulyFit Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Steve.